again. Welcome to the GSHS lecture series 4. Today we have Professor Srikant Kondapalli speaking on India and China crossroads, the future scenario. So before getting to the professor's work and to the professor's speech, I would request our GITAM School of Humanities and Social Sciences Director, Professor Nagendra Rao sir, to give his introductory remarks so that it would set up context for all the students and the faculty as well. Before getting into the director, this series is actually aimed at bringing intellectuals together with students to have a dialogue on the current topics. So students who want to participate and engage with Professor Srikant Kondapalli sir's work, please type in your questions and queries in the chat box during the conversation and at the end of the conversation as well. Thank you, and I request the director sir to address the gathering here.
I don't have to address gathering. I need to tell you about the Srikant. That's let me introduce him. I think Nihit would do much formally about his work and other things, but now some of the things which I personally know about Srikant, I would like to share with you. Srikant, welcome. This is primarily ours is a very new school which we have established 3 years before in 2018. Just it is growing up and growing up with a strength. And very good meritorious students are joining us, and we have a good group of teachers as well. With whatever limits we have, we are trying to do good academics here. It is about our GITAM School of Humanities and Social Sciences. Primarily, our school is at this moment English is the major faculty, and apart from that, we also have psychology, political science, mass communication, and visual communication as subjects. And we also have economics, sociology, history, and public policy as in a little minor role. But next year we want to update them to the full-fledged manner also. And that is the way we are developing this school into interdisciplinary and primarily social sciences and humanities school. That's about our school. Yeah, and now I need to tell about Srikant a bit because it's not about Srikant. When I'm speaking about these things, I think probably this is meant for my students. They need to understand certain things about how to approach their academics. That is what I'm going to speak for about 5 minutes about Srikant, and which you will understand as well how to approach your academic activity. This Srikant mere contemporaries. I think he's a couple of years senior to me in my JNU. And we were happy to be in the same hostel in JNU. So our meetings are always on the dining table. So whenever in dining table happens, there are, in JNU, we have a culture of boys and girls together and stay in one hostel. And there's a exclusive boys and exclusive girls as class. Some of us, all the time wants to bombard the dining table with our fights. We prefer to stay in a male hostels because, we don't have to, follow all the decency etiquettes which requires when we are accompanied by the girls in the mess room. In that noisy rooms as well, hostel rooms and the messes, Srikant always very composed, cool customer. And I think never I heard him uttering one loud voice in such a long association with him in JNU. Always same tempo. And when we are talking a lot much rhetorical about things, which whether they make sense or not make sense, everyone stick to our own positions. He always is up to the point, very objective, never bring some kind of element, subjective element here. Whatever he speaks during that hostel days as well, the student days as well, it is with some kind of conviction, less of the rhetorics and more of lot much what I can say, subject or clarity with which he speaks. And other things, I was in a Russian studies at that time. He was in a Chinese studies. And Russian studies is at the time most, what I can say, highest faculty, 20 faculty. In Chinese studies, is looking for an identity. But at the time itself, he could identify why he joining in the Chinese studies, how the China would grow after 20 years. Because remember, this is early 90s. And early 90s, China is not the China of contemporary times. Nobody knows actually what China is building, within China, and because it is guarded its walls very closely, and internally it is building so much of itself, and which it can deploy all that energies and that technologies and all that wealth later point of the time. But at that time, very few people understood what actually China is doing inside, and China, Srikant is one of them. And it hasn't come easily. He hasn't, at that time, even newspaper sources are, we don't have a Chinese exclusive reporters the way we have from for Hindu in UK or US and other countries. And he has to read from the Chinese sources, and he has a problem in the sense for other languages everywhere. Some kind of teacher, some kind of sources are available, but Chinese language not many. And Chinese language is the toughest language. You know that it is actually the diagrams or the figures. Mastering that language is not an easier one. And Srikant, I know how much he has to respirate to master the Chinese language so that he can read all the sources in his own language of the area which he is studying. And he used to advise me also, Nagendra, pay attention to the Russian language, because no, the second-rate English newspaper translations would not build a good researcher, and we need to see the issues from the local perspective, from the Chinese perspective or Russian perspective. For that, language learning is very, very essential. That's what he believed at the time. He could master Chinese language, but I could not master Russian language, even though I'm in Russian studies. That is the difference. How one acquired a scholarship, how consistently invest his time, sacrificing so many other things, and investing time in the right things, especially, that is very, very essential. What I can spend more time on in library, but maybe my time is not invested properly where it is requires to invest. He invested properly his time where actually it requires to be invested, and that is the way he cultivated his academics with a discipline, with a composure, and with a very, very calmness. And today, when he is, no wonder, if at all anyone remembers China expert in academia. I don't know about the diplomat community. Maybe some people might have studied Chinese issues on an equal level. And certainly, maybe some people in army also would have studied China, because which is required for them to build their strategies and other things. But in the academic field, I can tell you with a sense of confidence, not without any arrogance, that the first one who remembers everybody when it comes to the matters related to China are Srikant. So that is how it is. So I spoke all these things not to praise so much about him, but since most of you are here students and looking for to build yourself into the academic future, and how to approach your very academics, how composed manner and calm manner, in a right manner, in a disciplined manner, with a hard working. And that's if at all one person in my entire experience I had to recall, it is Srikant. I'm very happy that he happens to be person of our Telugu states. But I would have appreciated the gentleman from any part of the world. It is the scholarship on which he invested and which he cultivated, and with which he is serving India's interest when it comes to the policy making of China on China. So that's how. What about Srikant? Welcome, Srikant, one more time. And now Nihit, about you.
Thank you for that brief introduction itself, sir, because you have lessened my burden over introducing Dr. Srikant Kondapalli, sir. And beginning with a formal introduction, Dr. Srikant Kondapalli is a professor in Chinese studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is also an honorary fellow at Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi, and research associate at the Center for Chinese Studies, University of Stellenbosch, South Africa. He served at Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi, for nearly 12 years. He is educated in Chinese studies in India and China with a specialization in modern Chinese history in the Master of Arts at Osmania University at Hyderabad. He received his Master of Philosophy and Doctor of Philosophy in 1989 and 1995 respectively in Chinese Studies Division of School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He learned Chinese language at Beijing Language and Cultural University and was a postdoctoral visiting fellow at People's University, Beijing from 1996 to 98. He was also a visiting professor at National Shengqi University, Taipei in 2004. He has published over 3 books, 2 monographs, co-edited a volume, and several articles in edited books and in national and international journals and newspapers. He has presented several research papers at national and international conferences in India, China, Japan, Singapore, South Africa, Taiwan, United Kingdom, and United States, and lectured at the Indian academic, defense, and media establishments. He has also served as a guest faculty member at College of Naval Warfare, Army War College, Indo-Tibetan Border Police Academy, and Border Security Force Academy. It is with great pleasure and honor that I welcome Professor Srikant Kondapalli, sir, to deliver his lecture.
Thank you very much to the GITAM as well as Nagendra and Sai Venkat. Let me thank again Nagendra for that personal introduction. There used to be one Israel Mark at Usmania University in the Arts College. And he inspired me to pick up a China program. We had a Chinese history as part of the specialization those days. So Israel Mark suggested to me to focus on China. This was 1982, 1983. Nagendra was right that China was yet to rise at the time. They just began the reform program in 78. But till 92, the growth rates have not been very high in China. So 82, 83, I was doing my MA in Usmania University, and Israel Mark suggested I go for China program. So since then, I didn't look back. So it was also for me personally rewarding because there were a lot of incentives by studying China. As China was rising, it appeared to me my career was also rising. So it was a good suggestion Israel Mark made at the time. He was my teacher. So with this, let me begin our discussion today. And by the way, how much time do I have?
45 minutes would do, or 1 hour if you want.
Okay.
You can go up to 1 hour.
Thank you. So the topic today is India-China relations in terms of what has happened recently. And this has really put the bilateral relations at a crossroads. Because we had on June 15th night, we had 20 Indian soldiers killed. This is the first time in about 40 years after 1975 in Tulungla in Arunachal Pradesh, where Assam Rifles soldiers were killed by the Chinese. So June 15th last year was the first time after 40 years. And by the way, the commanding officer, Colonel Santosh Babu, who hails from Suryapet, he was killed in action in this skirmish. And they used barbed wire fencing, nail-studded bats, or other stones, etc., to beat each other. So this has touched the lowest of the India-China relations in the recent times. So the title is apt. We are at a crossroads. India-China relations are at a crossroads. And we do not know how this is going to be panning out. So the subtitle, The Future Scenarios, is also quite appropriate because there is a serious rethinking. I will explain those in which this January, Dr. Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister, mentioned about 8 red lines in terms of relations with China. So Indian government had drawn some red lines, probably for the first time. The Chinese drew red lines to India in 1976. They mentioned 3 conditions for evolving relations with India. One is that India should not have relations with Taiwan. Secondly, the Indian government should not speak about any threat vis-a-vis China. You all remember that the former defense minister, George Fernandez, in 1998 called China as a potential enemy number one. So China was pretty angry during the Pokhran 2 tests, nuclear tests. So there was the context where the Indian government did use the words threat or challenge, so on, which has been removed in the recent times. But with the Galwan incident on June 15th, we may probably be using this more often in the near future. The third condition China imposed is that the Indian press has been negative in its coverage of China. So the Indian government accepted the first two in saying that it will not evolve relations with Taiwan, diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Secondly, it also said we will not speak about the China threat in public documents or public discourse or so. Individuals are different, but as a government, it will not speak about China as a threat. So if you look at the Defense Ministry annual reports, they don't mention China as a threat. So what you see in the TV or newspapers is by the individuals, not by the government of India, following that condition. So the three conditions were almost met. The third condition obviously is beyond the government of India's control because India has free press. So there is no way the Indian government can say anything to the Indian media because those constitutional guarantees are inscribed, and the Indian media enjoys freedom in writing, in speech, in circulation, and so on and so forth. So these three conditions by the Chinese side, which was reiterated again in 1998-99, when Jaswant Singh, the former foreign minister, visited Beijing. So Dr. Jaishankar, in January this year, early this year, last month, he mentioned about 8 conditions. I want to mention this because then that provides a template for us to discuss the future scenarios. Dr. Jaishankar mentioned about the agreements already reached must be adhered to by both sides in their entirety. One of the things that he probably had in mind was the 1993 agreement, 96 agreement, 2005 agreement, 2013 agreement. These 4 agreements suggest to peace and stability on the border. And if there is any trouble, they will utilize the confidence building measures, CBMs, in order to address the problems on the India-China border areas. So Dr. Jaishankar was reminding China that we have signed some agreements, but you're not following them. You need to go back to those agreements and follow those. Number one. Number two, Dr. Jaishankar mentioned that the line of actual control, although the line has not been defined, but both sides know where their line is. So roughly in those areas, they must strictly observe and respect the line of actual control and no unilateral change in the status quo, because the previous agreement that I just mentioned also included the status quo before they finally resolve the territorial dispute. So status quo is also to be maintained. Probably he was mentioning by raising this second issue that during the last 1 year, China mobilized some 60,000 troops closer to the line of actual control or even beyond the line of actual control. And we have the incidents of pushing, shoving, stowing thrones, or even using some of the medieval equipment, military equipment. So this is the second condition, that the LAC has to be respected and the agreements have to be respected. The third is peace and tranquility, is the basis for developing the bilateral relations. The Chinese condition is, let us forget the territorial dispute, let us evolve economic relations, let us evolve multilateral relations in multilateral field or in other spheres. Indian government view is, let us have first peace and tranquility on the border, and then we evolve bilateral relations. So that's a difference in Chinese approach and Indian approach. Fourth red line that Jaishankar also suggested to the Chinese is, while both of them are speaking about multipolar world, the audience, I think, know that the Indian government, Chinese government, Russian government, the Brazilians and South Africans are together in BRICS format, and they suggest to multipolarity. That is, that no unipolar actions can be taken, no regime change, no violation of the independence of other countries in terms of intervention. So while Dr. Jaishankar mentioned about multipolarity, he also suggested to such multipolarity within Asia. Because in the recent times, what has happened is China has been imposing its will on other countries, on Vietnam, on Philippines, on Malaysia in South China Sea, on the Senkaku Islands dispute with Japan, on Australia. There is a lot of heartburn there in terms of the restrictions on trade, investments, and imports, basically, because Australia took the lead in questioning China in the COVID-19 origins. So China is trying to penalize Australia by putting restrictions on trade, and so it has weaponized bilateral trade with Australia. There are also other countries which are facing flack in relation to China's assertiveness. So Jaishankar was referring to a multipolar Asia rather than just multipolar world, because we are in Asia, the Chinese and the Indians, and so this is a suggestion that Dr. Jaishankar made as a fourth point. The fifth point is sensitivity towards each other. Should not be a one-sided one, but it should consider the other side in a reciprocal manner. For instance, China had cajoled India in recognizing Tibet as part of China. But there is no reciprocal arrangement from China in recognizing Kashmir as part of India. So there is a lot of discussion on why the Nehru government had recognized Tibet as part of China without the reciprocal agreement on Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir. This is important because as the Indian government had abolished the 370 article and converted Jammu and Kashmir into J&K and Ladakh union territories, two separate union territories in 2019 August. So this has resulted in China taking up that issue in the United Nations. China has raised the Kashmir issue in the United Nations 4 times so far. So probably Dr. Jaishankar was mentioning that reciprocity is a principle in diplomacy. But as IR students, we all know that reciprocity is a function of power. The weaker power listens to the greater power or major power. But India is trying to say that we are grown up, we have power as well, which is what the last 1 year mobilization of troops indicated. So India is putting its foot down. It didn't say anything about Tibet. You may recall that last year, the Dalai Lama's birthday, there was no message from the government of India to the Dalai Lama. India could have also raised the Tibet issue in the United Nations or in other fora, but it did not do. So Jaishankar is telling the Chinese that, see, you need to reciprocate on what we have signed before, and you cannot take it for granted. So this is one, the sensitivity of one should not be neglected, should not be one-sided. The sixth position that Dr. Jaishankar mentioned is, as rising powers, China and India have their own aspirations, and such pursuits cannot be ignored. For instance, India had launched the Act East policy in 2014 from Look East policy. So it has its own aspirations. Secondly, it has its interests, national interests, such as in terms of the Indian Ocean region, such as extended neighborhood in Central Asia or in other spheres. So as rising powers, they should be respectful of the others' aspirations. Seventhly, Dr. Jaishankar mentioned that while there are differences and even divergences, but the bilateral relations need to be managed because we have had the casualties in Galwan last year. So China crossed the line, he was suggesting, by this seventh condition. The eighth condition that Dr. Jaishankar mentioned is, as civilizational states, India and China with long historical background, they need to take a longer view rather than a short-term tactical view on whether this hill belongs to you or this much land is your sovereign territory or others. As you know, in Ladakh, there is a tug of war in terms of controlling the heights and occupying several hundred square kilometers. Much of this land, as Nehru once mentioned, is barren. Of course, as states, nation states, no state considers this as barren, and land is an emotional issue. Sovereignty is an emotional issue. It raises a lot of nationalism, patriotism. So this is one where the conditions are important. So for the first time, the Indian government had laid down 8 conditions for the Chinese 3 conditions, without, of course, elaborating so that there is maneuverability. So in this background, let me quickly mention to you the broad features of India-China relations, how they have come to the crossroads, and look at the future scenarios. We all know that these 2 countries are civilizations, long history. You and me and the Chinese today have certain cultural patterns inherited several hundreds of years ago in terms of values, in terms of traditions, in terms of culture, in terms of festivals, in terms of the social system, and so on and so forth. So one of the elements here is ancient Chinese or even traditional Chinese would consider India as Tianchu. Tianchu roughly translated as Western heaven. Now, most of us in the audience know the Hanuman, right? In China, there is the Monkey King, almost like a Hanuman. And we all go through because the kids do play the Chota Bheem and other cartoons regularly. So in China as well, the Monkey King is a major attraction for the children and others. So this Monkey King goes to the west. So from China, west is India or the South Asian subcontinent. Those days in the ancient times. So the Monkey King goes to the western areas to pick up magical traits, basically tantric aspects. So with that, he defeats the evil. And that is the legend, that is the myth that has been generated in the journey to the west, a classic like our Ramayana or Mahabharata. So this has been ingrained in the Chinese mind that India is a Western heaven. However, when we look back in the background of the last 1 year events, so where is the civilizational construct when the Chinese used the barbed wire fencing bats against Colonel Santosh Babu and others? Where was this civilizational, taking back and viewing the other as part of the Western heaven? I also wanted to remind that last 1 week, the Global Times, which is a nationalist tabloid in China, also, by the way, controlled by the Central Committee of the Communist Party, but they have given some leverage to express nationalist feelings by this tabloid. So the Global Times has been calling India as a barbarian in the light of the last 1 year, and specifically as they have to vacate the land in Pankumso Lake in the South Bank, North Bank. There has been, the Chinese have demolished what they have constructed in the last 1 year. They went back to the east of Sirijap, from where they have come roughly in May last year. And so those infrastructure projects have been demolished. And so in the light of this, and when they released the 4 casualties number and a 5th one injured seriously, there is a lot of nationalism that has been generated in China. And so Global Times has called India or Indian response as barbaric. So this is a contrast between the two. Ancient Chinese or traditional Chinese, by invoking civilization on the one hand and considering India as a Western heaven. On the other hand, you have Global Times mentioning India as barbaric. So there is a huge disjuncture between these two constructs. Of course, the Global Times is flexible. They use foreign policy in very tactical manner. So they may probably go back in a few months' time to the civilizational construct and then start singing a different song altogether in a few months' time, depending on the bilateral relations, the health of the bilateral relations. So these two images that you gather in the current background of a civilized state and the barbaric responses. Of course, both China and India today are modern states, modern nation states since 1947 and 1949. So those civilizationals are a feel-good factor for the leaders to say when they are meeting in Wuhan or in Chennai. But I think there will be a problem in future to discuss about civilizational states, because our media and the Chinese media will also show those barbed wire fencing bats which were used by the military forces. So that is one context of the India-China relations. A second one is, these are two largest populated areas in the world, 1.47 billion and 1.3 billion people. So that's a huge, nearly 2 billion people, 3 billion people out of nearly 7 billion people in the world. So that's puts a lot of responsibility as well in terms of economic development, in terms of eradication of poverty, in terms of power as well. Not in traditional IR discipline, but people do provide power in terms of economy, in terms of military, in terms of so many other indicators. In the case of India, like much in the audience today, India is 26 years old on an average, while China is 36 years old, population demographic profile wise. So there is speculation about Chinese rise because of this aging process. China is currently the second largest economy in the world with $14 trillion GDP, while India is nearly $3 trillion GDP with 6th position in the global ranking. And there is a plan for India to become a $5 trillion economy in the near future. So, of course, we have gone through the COVID-19 disaster last year. So we have to recover substantially in the economic sphere in order to catch up with that $5 trillion target. But China and India are also the third and fourth largest militaries in the world, both in conventional and nuclear ballistic missile capabilities. They're also the largest consumers of resources like iron ore, coal, cement, copper, energy. You call it the resources consumption is pretty high. China is second largest, while India is the fourth largest in terms of consuming various, including energy, which also means that the future trajectories would be either in cooperation or in competition in these spheres. Demographic dividend is with India, with 26 years average age. That provides a huge advantage for India in many ways. Having put that context, let me take you to the differences in China and India in terms of their aspirations and what do they want in future, so that we can get some empirical data on the future scenarios. China is a member of the United Nations Security Council, while India is an aspiring member, is aspiring to be a member. You all know that G4 bidding has been made by India. So far, it did not succeed. China is the only one which has not explicitly supported India in the P5 countries in the UNSC. China is a member of several multilateral organizations, SEO, BRICS, East Asian Summit, WTO, IMF, so on. India is also a member, not the UNSC, but SEO, BRICS, almost all where China is located. And this also is problematic because you can't be fighting a war in the border areas and shaking hands in the multilateral institutions. I mean, all the other countries would try to ask what's happening in the bilateral field from the leaders, from the. So this is a concern that needs to be addressed. China is fourth largest in terms of comprehensive national power. Since we are all researchers, I would also suggest some of you to take up this topic, comprehensive national power. This is a new variable that has been in place in the Soviet Union in the 60s, but it has been picked up by the Americans and then by the Chinese and now by India. So comprehensive national power is an indicator to look at all the aspects of the power indicators. In this sphere, China is fourth largest in the world, while India is sixth largest, roughly, in the comprehensive national power category. There are several indicators. One is GDP, second, military, third, the government's central government or the local government that is state government, how far these orders are followed at the local areas, meaning the power of the state to direct attention from its people. Then how much energy are you consuming? How much health indicators do you have? HRD, literacy, and so on. Then soft power. All these are a mix of the comprehensive national power. And due to COVID, China took a beating in terms of its soft power, while with the COVAX and other vaccines, the Indian profile is generally increasing in this soft power matrix. This is one where the leadership also needs to be paying much attention. But China is at the supply chain mechanism center because of its manufacturing sector. And with the COVID-19, there has been some disruption in this sphere. China today is also steering several financial institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank or the New Development Bank of the BRICS, along with the other BRICS countries. In the case of India, India is also the second largest partner in the AIIB and also in the New Development Bank of the BRICS. China's aspirations, China uses very vague words, and it is actually difficult to translate some of these. Whatever that Nagendra told you, it is still difficult to translate a lot of Chinese words. For instance, they say China dream. We know what the American dream is, meaning that they want to excel, that they want to give any citizen of the US can now become the president, or with the vice president Kamala Harris, any woman can also aspire to the highest post in US. And it is considered to be a melting pot and equal opportunities in general. Of course, the blacks have their own concerns. Nevertheless, one of the beauties of US is if you are capable, if you are competitive, there is that recognition. With all things being equal. In the case of China, we do not still know what China dream means. What I can say at the moment is it is to bring in the Communist Party to be the global power. China is the global power headed by the Communist Party. That is what we understand by what China dream means. So here is 90 million cadres out of 1.47 billion. That's about 6.5% of the Chinese. They want to control not just China, but also want to be a global power. That is what the 19th Communist Party Congress mentioned in 2017. Although not in such terms, but so China dream is one that is, and here is what Jaishankar's multipolarity in Asia is relevant. That we are no pushover, as the last 1 year military preparation exhibited. You can't push India. Or as General Naravane, the army chief mentioned, we are prepared to stay back in Pankungso, South Bank, in other areas. As the Indian Air Force chief mentioned, if the Chinese are aggressive, India will also be equally aggressive. So they sent these communications to China, and China has to relent. China has to climb down in the current circumstances. So China dream is not acceptable to India because India has no place in this, except as a subservient. So futuristic scenario that China is trying to build, India has no space. At least so far, China did not provide any guarantees for India. And with the Galwan incident, it appears that China is closing down any communication with India in terms of a futuristic Asia. So the China dream is problematic for India. We don't know where we are in that scheme of things. This is one reason why India did not join the Belt and Road Initiative, because it is Chinese-led, and it appeared that China is trying to revive a middle kingdom with India as one of those vassal states like Ceylon, like other countries who historically have been vassals of China. This is not in India's interest. So that is the reason why India did not join the China Dream or the Belt and Road Initiative or China Rejuvenation. China has another concept called the Community of Common Destiny. Again, we don't know how to translate this. And Chinese use very innocuous words, very difficult to translate. But what I can say is China wants to build alliances, friends, partnerships with this concept. And India is not prepared to join such bandwagoning because we have basically the problems related to the territorial dispute, which has not been resolved. And you can't take this issue into the 21st century while every time we have some problem on the border. So it is not again in India's interest to join the Community of Common Destiny. It's a Chinese term. We don't know what is at the end of the tunnel of that common destiny. So basically, China is trying to say that you and I are on a journey, we are on a highway, and your aspirations and my aspirations are equal. We are in this journey for a common destiny. But that is not true. We are a democracy. China is Communist Party led, and we do not know what their aspirations are. They have not clearly mentioned, except saying that they want to occupy the center stage, that is global power matrix. But India is not in that league. India is not planning to occupy the center stage because it is open, democratic, and has joined several of the globalization indicators with, of course, the Indian people's interest. For instance, in WTO, we have not completely opened up the agriculture sector or other sectors because of the various problems that we face. China's aspirations also include 3 evils. So China thinks that its ethnic minorities are up in arms. The Uyghurs, the Tibetans, the Mongols, the Hui, the other minorities. And so they have the separatism, extremism, and splitism for the Uyghurs, for the Tibetans, for the Mongolians, and the Taiwanese. While India had signed this in a joint statement in 2006, and also in the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, India has problems to adjust with this 3 evils construct. For instance, India doesn't treat Kashmiris as evil. So it doesn't have that kind of a language. Since we have introduced democracy intensely now with the grassroots level democratic experiment in Jammu and Kashmir, in other areas. So the Chinese and Indian aspirations do not match here. So what is India's aspirations? One, as I just mentioned, $5 trillion economy. And it is not saying we will displace the other countries for achieving this. It is through self-reliance that India is trying to say it wants to be a $5 trillion economy, not by displacing China or any other country. India also stated that it wants to have an inclusive architecture. For instance, Prime Minister Modi's speech in Shangri-La Dialogue 3 years ago suggested to the inclusive architecture, even in Indo-Pacific. So that is one where we come across the Indian India is also increasingly, Indian leaders are increasingly stating that we want to promote democracy abroad. So, for instance, when you look at Nepal, it used to be a monarchy, and previously Panchayat and the monarchy. Now we have elections in Nepal, and some commentators suggested this is India has been nudging Nepal to conduct regularly on a competitive basis the elections in Nepal. Likewise in Bhutan, likewise in Bangladesh, or in Sri Lanka, or in Maldives. So roughly in South Asian region, although we have been relatively quiet on Aung San Suu Kyi or on other factors, nevertheless, in general, the Indian leaders are increasingly speaking about promoting democracy. And the other national interest is counterterrorism, in which India had joined several initiatives, etc. So these are aspirations which have a differing equation between China and India, and these will have the futuristic scenarios slightly different from each other. Let us look at the policies of China towards India and Indian policies towards China briefly. China, in all its assessments, they consider that India is a big country in South Asia. In all their assessments, that is their position. The politics behind this is India is a big country, but within only South Asia. That is what their construct. But you can't put a $3 trillion economy in a South Asian box. And its navy is also growing in the Indian Ocean. During tsunami, the Indian Navy provided assistance to 24,000 victims in tsunami in 2004-05, in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, or in other areas. But China sent just 2 aircrafts for supply of food in the tsunami. So India used its hard power for the relief purposes. No such indicator by China. So if China wants to put India into the South Asia box, India is trying to say, see, we are growing up. We are a 6th largest economy. We are, in many indicators, we are now jumping in ease of doing business or in other indicators. So India is saying that this construct is a Cold War construct, like the Americans used, that India is a part of South Asia. And they were trying to balance India through Pakistan, through nuclear weapons, through conventional weapons, through ballistic missiles, or through other, for instance, in the 1267 Committee on Counterterrorism, China defends Pakistan on Masood Azhar, on Zakirul Rahman, or in other cases. So it appears to outsiders that China has something up its sleeve by mentioning India is only a part of South Asia. In any case, we are living in a post-Cold War situation. India had launched the Look-East policy. India is not seeking blessings of China in any way on this. India is growing at its own pace, and its footprint is increasing. For instance, the ASEAN countries today want India to be playing a bigger role to balance China, because China is militarizing the South China Sea. So there is Goh Chok Tong, the former Prime Minister of Singapore, for instance, wanted India to be a balancer to China, like a jumbo jet, 2 wings. China and India has 2 wings, so that it can be, the cruise is balanced properly. China did follow an engagement policy vis-a-vis India, and it is reflected in the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence we call Panchsheel. There was the Bandung Conference, there is the multilateralism interactions, there is multipolarity, and so on. But these are still problematic from an Indian perspective. Multipolarity, multilateralism is fine, but we should have peace and stability on the border. That's the Indian bottom line. So the Chinese policy towards India is seeing this as a problematic. Within China, the Chinese military has a different perspective, and they consider India as a hegemon in South Asia. Of course, no Indian scholar or policy consider China as a hegemon in Southeast Asia or East Asia, Central Asia or South Asia or other places. Nevertheless, there is the Chinese military having its annual reports in those they mention. They also say that India is having global ambitions. And so it needs to be again confined to South Asia. India's footprint in the Indian Ocean is increasing. So the Chinese military wants the Hambantota port or the Jimani base in Pakistan or in Seychelles. They had an island in Maldives before the elections 2 years ago, and they are losing control over this. So, which indicates basically that there is a negative view of India by China. Let's look at what India thinks about China. For the past 70 years, India followed an engagement policy towards China. Nehru initiated this, so he straight away recognized Taiwan, Tibet as part of China without seeking any reciprocal arrangements on Kashmir or on Northeast. Some Chinese consider Manipur as part of China. Of course, they also consider Vladivostok as part of China or Kazakhstan as part of China. So there are a lot of nationalist views within China. Maybe fringe elements, maybe, but what is important is that those are given credence in the public sphere. India followed an engagement policy even now, and this is reflected in Taiwan-Tibet policies. It also is reflected in multilateral fields, in Bandung Conference and so on. Trade increasing, cultural exchanges, ambassadorial exchanges, and in confidence building measures. India did think about a kind of status quoist policy towards China. For example, India rejected the Chinese offer for an FTA, free trade area. This is important because wherever the Chinese went, they displaced the local industries. So India is cautious. The Chamber of Commerce is cautious that Chinese goods will flood our market and it will lead to unemployment and so on. India also restricted the Chinese investment in the border areas or in the naval bases area. No country allows these anyway. So that is some restriction, which suggests to a kind of status quo policy. But Chinese also have restricted the Indian investments or Indian trade. For instance, China did not open up its market for Indian software or the Indian pharmaceutical companies or in other sectors. So there is also equally or even more restrictions by China, even though it is a member of the WTO. Balance of power, yes, there is. The Chinese consider the emerging US-India relations in terms of those foundational agreements as part of the balance of power or even containment. Although Indian leaders, Manmohan Singh and even Prime Minister Modi said we are not part of the containment of China when we deal with the US, when we have relations with the US. But China doesn't guarantee that it is not containing India through Pakistan or through other areas. So this suggests the policies between India and China are kind of lopsided in nature. And these are reflected in terms of the territorial dispute and others. So I will not discuss the territorial dispute. If there is any Q&A, then I would be able to answer in those. Straight away, coming to the recent times, the issues that we have between India and China that include the territorial dispute. Last 1 year has been the major flashpoint. in Pankungso Lake and other areas, Depsang Plains, Galwan, Finger Point 15, Finger Point 17, and others from the Karakoram ranges to that of the southeast of Ladakh. There is also the issue of Tibet. The 15th Dalai Lama reincarnation issue is heating up. The current Dalai Lama is in his mid-80s, and so there is some speculation about China appointing its own Dalai Lama. This would have resulted in a lot of chaotic situation among the Tibetans. So the US Congress passed the TPSA, Tibet Policy Support Act, in which they suggested that they will put sanctions on Chinese officials involved in the nomination of their own Dalai Lama. Indian government so far said nothing about this, about the issue of reincarnation. Possibly they are trying to resolve through a backdoor channel. We do not know yet, but that is. But post-Dalai Lama situation is going to be a key problematic for India. So this is one of the future scenarios, because we have about 150 odd monasteries, gompas, in the Trans-Himalayan region. And I would suggest many of the researchers at GITAM University to go into these areas. During summer, just take a backpack, travel around in these places, which are quite picturesque. Do some surveys in these, understanding the perceptions of the people living in these areas. The Trans-Himalayan region is predominantly Buddhist in nature. So the Gompas have a huge role in terms of the livelihood issues. Their life and death is in the hands of the Gompas, the monasteries, in terms of religious ceremonies and others, because they are completely religious. And so the post-Dalai Lama, the post-14th Dalai Lama scenarios are a major problematic for India to consider, and in relation to China. So, for instance, there are a lot of speculations because it is not known what the exact pattern of post-Dalai Lama situation. Technically, the current Dalai Lama nominates his successor, and the current Dalai Lama can foresee a boy or even a girl to be the next Dalai Lama from among the Tibetan communities. But if these come from the Trans-Himalayan region, we're going to have a uncertainty on the border for a long time to come. So essentially, then there is the post-Dalai Lama situations. So here the United States took a legalistic position, a Tibetan position on penalizing Chinese officials in terms of any intervention on the 15th Dalai Lama. Whichever way you look at this is going to be of some concern for India. Probably it will try to resolve this issue through consultations with the Tibetans. Then there is also the Kashmir related, as I just mentioned. In China has been reviving the Kashmir card, and by raising these issues in the Security Council, it had taken a position, a pro-Pakistani position, which also means that India needs to evaluate its one China policy, as former Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj mentioned to her counterpart Wang Yi, on positing the one China with one India policies. So we have to see this in the near future, what could be the situation. We have had several discussions. The informal summit meetings are one, but in broad pattern, we have these issues on trade deficits, which are going to grow, Even during the COVID-19, last year we had a $87 billion trade with $45 billion trade deficit. So for the past 13, 14 years, India lost some $900 billion in trade deficits to China. If Trump administration had penalized China with the tariff wars, it is hard to see why India does not take the tariff wars position with China in the near future. Trade wars are a potential between India and China. This is one scenario for the future. In this context, the Galwan situation evolved. Last year, since April, May, China mobilized in violation of the agreements that it signed with India, that no troops will be allowed closer to the line of actual control. But not only China mobilized 60,000 troops, but also termed this area as a sovereignty of China. Without even discussing with India, unilaterally China declared that this area is its sovereignty. Being a large economy and power, so there are consequences. But India stood up, and today they have to vacate the Pankungso Lake, which means that there is now this problem of how do you reconcile with your words of sovereignty, and you have to vacate those lands. So there will be backlash among the people in China on this issue, which China wants to package by pushing nationalism, to what some of the press has been covering recently. They have also termed the Ladakh Union Territory as illegal and raised these issues in the United Nations Security Council. There is also the Chinese objection to the infrastructure projects. Although they have built their own infrastructure projects in their own line of actual control, perceived line of actual control areas, it is objecting to the Indian construction of roads, feeder lines, etc., in Indian control line of actual control regions. So this is the background for what has happened in the recent times. Of course, India did not join the Belt and Road Initiative, which has the CPEC projects, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. China exhibited a lot of coercion. They have mobilized 2 divisions in addition to mobilizing 4 more divisions from Xinjiang and other areas. They've also put up several military equipment in Army, Navy, not in the Navy, in the Air Force, the latest weapon systems. Yet the Indian side had deterred China. And so we saw on February 10th this month, the Ministry of National Defense spokesperson, Senior Colonel Wu Qian, mentioned about synchronized disengagement process. Raksha Mantri spoke to the Indian Parliament, where he mentioned about phased, coordinated, and verifiable disengagement process. So this is going to be very tedious, very arduous, very time-consuming, although they announced that in Pankungso Lake, they have completed the disengagement process. So what are the effects of all this? The effects are there is a spread of strategic mutual mistrust and public anger. 61% of the Indian people polled mention about their negative attitude towards China. Likewise, in China, the last 1 week, they have been raising the nationalism card, which means that we have now a new element in the Chinese responses. There is also the military, as I just mentioned, the diplomatic reactions, the various other responses. So the way out has been the disengagement process that both of them have signed. There were 10 rounds of discussions, and implementation is going to be so Indian strategies to cope up with this situation is in the economic field, diplomatic field, political, strategic, military. In economic field, India did not sign the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, because that has some problems for the Indian economic growth rates. Likewise, in other spheres, the Belt and Road Initiative, which it did not join, but the Chabahar Sabang port in Indonesia, Chabahar in Iran. So those are things that India had undertaken in economic field. In diplomatic field, they have these concentric circles across Asia, neighborhood first policy. There is the controlled engagement process with China. At political level, there is the support to the democracies, and in strategy, the Act East, the Quadrilateral, the Indo-Pacific, and others. Because of lack of time, I'm quickly mentioning a few, but you can raise these. Futuristic scenario, there are several limitations in China's rise, which will impact on relations with India. Also, there are the advantages that India also has, demographic, economic, technological, geostrategic, or in other spheres. So both are equally matched in this sphere. So futuristic scenario would mean these advantages bringing to the fore the economic growth rates, manufacturing sector, and so on. Broadly, three scenarios can be painted. One is China's rise leading to the subjugation of the neighborhood across China's neighborhood, that is Southeast Asia, East Asia, Central Asia, through the Belt and Road Initiative or Community of Common Destiny related aspects, which means a marginalization of India. That is also a major scenario. However, Indian fundamentals are strong. There are also other countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Japan, and in other regions like Kazakhstan. There are stronger countries, stronger powers, which would also have their own aspirations. So it is not going to be a cakewalk for China. So as the Galwan incident and the disengagement process suggests, there is the Indian deterrence of China. So this is leading to a problem for China in terms of gobbling up the neighborhood. The second scenario in future is a geopolitical limitation of China because of the emergence of other powers. While China is balancing them, but there is no guarantee that they cannot rise. You may have heard about the rise of the rest, including China, of course. There is the Indonesia, Turkey, or other countries. The rise of the rest, as has been mentioned by an Indian origin American. Then you have also a possibility of China's decline in future. For instance, China is facing today a middle income trap. Over 100 countries could not escape the middle income trap, which basically it suggests that if you cannot cross and sustain the economic growth rates and with a per capita income of $10,000, then you're going to go down the drain, stagnate for a long period of time. With the limitations that China has in demographic or in other spheres, there is a problem for China to continuously rise. Last year, China grew at 2.5%. Before that, 5.9%. From a 14% rise in the 90s, they have grown only at 2.5. Well, you can say that it is COVID-19, there are difficulties, but the projections are not at 10%, 14% in future. So there is a marginal decline of China's rise, which means a new normal of a medium-high growth is also a factor that India needs to consider. And finally, let me stop here by saying there is a flux in the international situation. The killing of 20 Indian soldiers has been a shock to the bilateral relations between India and China. India is definitely at a crossroads with China. It is going back to the basics of the bilateral relations. So it has to reconstruct all those, including on one China, one India policies in the near future. So this is a period for a reassessment of the relations. The asymmetry in power relations did not guarantee for the Chinese military troops to roll back from Pankungso. So this suggests that India also is powerful. India can also put its foot down. So that is finally also the policy alternatives for the future. A short term, India and China began with the 2000s formula that there is enough space for both countries in Asia. But with the recent skirmishes as well as competition, this is passé now. The space is getting reduced. Both are trying to gobble up the spaces wherever those exist. With the Galwan incident, obviously the ASEAN countries will have a rethink in terms of balancing China, because India is not grabbing the South China Sea islands, and no Indian leader has said that since Chola Empire had occupied the South China Sea, so today Indian government will also militarize South China Sea, like the Chinese argument that during the Ming Dynasty they found some coins, so they have tried to militarize that area. In other words, since India does not have the encroaching sovereignty over these states, while China is encroaching and has been aggressive and assertive, so there is space for India to grow in this milieu. That's a futuristic scenario. Indian officials like the National Security Advisor, Mr. Ajit Doval, mentioned about punching appropriately, not punching above the belt, punching above below the belt, but punching appropriately. We have seen the Uri surgical strikes, the Balakot strikes, and now the Galwan incident, where the Chinese have to withdraw finally to go back to the April 2020 positions. This suggests that there is a serious thinking in the government of India on punching appropriately where its core interests are located. So this is one other futuristic scenario. While India follows an independent foreign policy or strategic autonomy or even closer relations with the United States, we do not know. It also depends on the situation. As the former foreign secretary mentioned, it is going to be issue-based coordination with many countries. So that provides a lot of flexibility for India in the future.
So and I invite my friend Haindavi to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Nihit. On behalf of GITAM School of Humanities and Social Sciences, I am honored to propose vote of thanks to Professor Srikant Kondapalli for enlightening us on a strategic and contemporary relations between India and China. We, the students, are fortunate to listen to you on international relations. We are fortunate to have you and are thankful to you for sharing your graceful words with us in today's meeting, sir. I also thank our director of GSHS, Professor Nagendra Rao, for facilitating wonderful discussion for the sake of young minds. Finally, I thank all the faculty, students, friends, and other participants for attending and making the gathering a success. Once again, thank you all.